Hey, Crossing family. Last week we started a brand new sermon series called The Interns. And our preacher today, he's a former intern. If you would, help me welcome my buddy and our former intern, Justus York.
Well, how's it going, Crossing family? My name is Justus York, and about 2 years ago, I had the privilege to be an intern at y'all's church, and it is so good to be back with you guys today. Now, since it's been 2 years, I feel like I need to update you on a few things that have happened since then. Now, the first, it came from a little more pain than I would have liked. It came from a lot more stomach aches than I would have preferred, but I have came to the conclusion that Delaware is the #1 state in America for seafood. You guys have rocked it. I don't think it's a close race right now. So right after my internship, I went back to Johnson University where I wrapped up my senior year, and I said, man, I am done with school. I'm ready to go. And the month after, I joined a residency and started my master's program. I don't know what happened there, but I went to Phoenix, Arizona, and it's at a church called Christ Church of the Valley. It's about 30,000 people and 12 campuses. It's a little crazy, but that was where I wanted to go to get away from everything I knew and to get a great college experience and also get around some people that I'd never met before. When people hear the term residency, though, they think, oh, yeah, like a doctor. And I have to look at them, I'm like, no, I think more like an intern, but I stayed here longer than I should have. That's kind of the idea you have to go for there. But all in all, it has been a fantastic time spent out west. But luckily for me, an education is not the only thing that I have gained in Arizona. I also managed to meet and fall in love with my future wife, Maddie, who you'll see here on the screen, and also if you want to wave to her on the front row right here, she is here with us today. I'm not sure how I convinced her to fall in love with me, but I'm not one to argue with good results, so I'm just going with it. So I guess you could say there's been a lot of life lived since the last time I was here, and I imagine the same could be said for you guys as well. So I'd love to catch up and hear your stories as well right after service. And how about the timing we have, too, for this series? This is the second week of the series, The Interns. I mean, it feels like just yesterday, Mark and I were up here tag teaming a sermon on my favorite event in the life of Christ. And rather than turn that around and do that sermon again, I thought I would share about what I think is the most impactful conversation that Christ has with his followers. Last week, though, Adam and Chloe, they kicked us off with the beginning of our series, and I think they started off fantastic. They tackled one of the toughest and what I would argue is the most challenging topic that Christ tells us to do. He says, don't worry. And that's a big statement to make. So Adam pointed out that when we get stuck and worry, we tend to make the wrong thing the main thing. And we can get trapped in that. But Chloe, she came out and she said, hey, this is what happens and what you do when you get stuck in these situations. You sprint at Jesus. And then she gave us a ton of great applications and things we all can do to get closer and run towards Jesus. It was just so good, and I think it was a great way to kick off the series. Today, we're going to look at what I've labeled the discipleship dilemma. We're going to dive into Luke chapter 14, and we're going to hear 3 things from Christ, I think, that are going to push us, they're going to challenge us, and they're going to stretch us as all followers of Jesus. Because while Jesus, he's talking to a crowd in the passage that we're reading today, I hope you understand that he's talking to us as well. So we're going to start in Luke 14, verse 25, but before that, let me catch you up on a speed with what happened in the beginning of chapter 14. Jesus, he's eating dinner with the Pharisees, and when Jesus and the Pharisees are together, one thing tends to happen. Drama. Always. So they're having dinner in this private room, and, well, not private, what we think would be a private room, but the Pharisees, they ate in like a public space. It would be more of a back porch. And there's a lot of nosy people in this day. So they'd be like, oh, Jesus is talking over here, so we're going to go crowd around and hear what Jesus has to say to the Pharisees. And if they got anywhere close, they would have heard a blowout. This conversation started off with Jesus getting grilled for healing a man on the Sabbath. He saves this man's life, but he did it on the wrong day, so they had to get on to him for that. And so Jesus, he rebuttals back and he says, well, you guys are Or we're all sitting at this table and you guys are fighting one another over who gets to sit where. Don't we think that's a little childish and a little lack of humility there? And then he turns around again and he tells a parable. So he hooks him in, and it turns out the parable is about a lack of humility. So he calls them out again with that. And that leads us right to verse 25, where we'll start today. But I just wanted you to know that as we come into this passage today, that there is a head of steam coming behind what's going on. We'll start with 25. A large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, "If you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else, your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple." So Jesus leaves the house, and this crowd starts following him out because they're like, well, what's going to happen next? What's Jesus going to do? What's Jesus going to say? What's going to happen? And they were like vultures, just coming right all around him and gathering together. And rather than immediately do some miracles or start healing or telling more parables, Jesus, he says, stop it, guys. He knew that the majority of the ones following him there, well, they were on the bandwagon. They were following the hype. They knew the excitement was going to be around Jesus, and they just wanted to see what was happening. So Jesus, he calls the crowd to do something counterculture. He says, if you want to follow me, I'm going to ask that you hate anyone that you'd want to hug. Yeah, those words that say hate are in red. They're the words of Jesus, and he's saying to hate. So what does Jesus really mean? Is he really saying that you should hate somebody? Is the man who says love is the greatest commandment telling us to hate somebody? Well, mostly. Did you catch that insert right there, though? He says, by comparison. Jesus is saying that your devotion to him, it should be so great that by comparison it looks like you hate others. So I love Jesus this much. I love my family too. But there's a large gap in between how much I love Jesus. And that time for someone to listen to Jesus' call and drop what they are doing to be a disciple, it would have been considered an act of hatred and an act of betrayal to that person's family. Not because he didn't love his family, but because he chose Jesus first. The scholar Leon Morris, he puts it like this: the man whose priorities are right has such an attitude of love for the things of God that it makes all interest in the affairs of this life appear by comparison as hatred. And that's the first thing that Jesus says to this crowd. And this, it's a large crowd. And I know when I say the word large and crowd, you guys are thinking, oh, there's a couple hundred people there. Like maybe that's a big crowd. But you got to think of who Jesus was talking to. He fed 5,000 people before. And that was 5,000 men. You got to add their families on top of that as well. So when he says large crowd, you've got to think there could be thousands of people right there. And rather than attempt to build the crowd, Jesus cranks up his chainsaw and he gets ready to cut them down. He says, I don't want this many people here. Why would he do that? Well, Jesus, he looks out into this crowd and he says, I see a bunch of fans. I'm not seeing followers. And Jesus, he was looking for real followers. He wasn't looking for just apathetic fans. And so often we see strength in churches by how big they are, how many numbers they have. And Jesus, he's doing the opposite. He's looking for the opposite of that. He was looking for strength in heart, because Jesus knows that he's about to change the world with 12 men. He can be a little picky on whose heart he's working with. And today we struggle with the same issue. We love a good crowd. We love to see us on the winning side, to have the masses on our side, to be the top dogs, the attractive ones. But have you seen our culture today? As Christians, we've become the underdog. But luckily, we're not called by Jesus to be popular. We're called to be followers. Now, growing up, I had the privilege to play football for 13 years. For about the first 8 years or so, that'd be the photo on the right, I played in a league called Pop Warner. And so this is, it was awesome for a 9-year-old kid at the time because I'm in 2nd grade in full pads and a helmet, and my parents said, go hit all the kids you want. And so that's 3 nights a week that I was running rampant on these kids. And then every Sunday, we had the opportunity to play a game. I loved that time. But the catch was that my games were all played on Sunday. If you know me, and I'll tell you now, but my dad is a pastor. You can see where those two things might butt some heads. So we would do whatever was possible to get me to those football games, but there was always one rule that we would never, ever break. You don't miss church. And there is no exception for that. I tried a few ways to get out. So there was quite a few weekends that you could walk up and you could look in the first pew and you would see me, hands lifted high, ready to worship, cleats on, football pants on, shoulder pad and helmet right next to me. As soon as that last prayer was said, I'm booking out the door and getting to wherever I could go to play football as quick as possible. Now, sometimes for me, this meant that my family didn't get to go to the games. They would just send me. Other times, this meant that I was getting into someone my family said was not a stranger's car to go to a game to play with them. But other times, that meant that I missed the game too, that I didn't get to play football because my family was prioritizing Christ. And you could ask, because of that, did my family hate football? No. They just loved Jesus more. Did my family not want me to be with my team at every single game? Well, no. They just loved Jesus more. Did my family ruin my 9-year-old athletic career? I mean, I can blame my genes on my parents, but it wasn't because I was missing games. No, they just loved Jesus more. You see, my parents, they instilled in me that I am to love Jesus more than anything else in this world. To others, that might look a little different. It might even look like hatred. But to us, it looked like fully devoted followers of Christ. So we'll keep going on. As soon as Jesus, he calls them to hate those they'd want to hug, a few people would have started walking away. Like, obviously, the show was not what they expected. They're going to leave. But what Jesus says next, it's going to cause these people to sprint in the opposite direction in large numbers. Verse 27 says this, and if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. Okay? So first, Jesus, he says, you got to hate those you want to hug. And he follows that up with, carry something that kills you. What is up with this guy? What is he doing right here? Because even to refer to the cross, that's something that's going to strike fear into the heart of every listener. Even more so in the Jews that were there at that point in time. Let me illustrate why. About 25 years before Jesus makes this statement, a guy named General Varus, he takes over control of this nation of Syria. The Jews, they weren't a fan of this because this was getting a little too close to home, so they threw a revolt. We're like, we'll show him, we'll get him out of here. The Jews were vastly outnumbered. They didn't have the power, and General Varus wanted to make a statement. And he said, this is not going to happen again, and I'm going to make sure of it. So to discourage the Jews from doing this again, he put 2,000 Jews on a cross, killed them. From the road to Syria to Galilee was lined with 2,000 crosses, and 2,000 Jews hung on those crosses. That image and that story was going to be etched into the mind of every single person in that crowd. That was their friends and family and parents and grandparents. They knew those faces. And here Jesus is. He's asking them to voluntarily go and pick up that cross. The same tool that had killed thousands and the tool that was only known for one thing: a gruesome, painful death. Jesus, he's telling the crowd here and us that if you are my disciple, I will demand total allegiance. The trip to the cross, it's only one way. You see, the challenge of the call of Jesus is that it's a call to everything, forever. And there's a major issue that comes with carrying the cross. Obviously, this one's a little bigger than normal, but the cross isn't small, and it's really bulky, both in the physical world, but also in spirituality. It is a big thing to carry. And what happens when you're going to carry something that's heavy, when you're carrying something that's large? Well, if I'm going to carry something big, I'm going to drop whatever is in my hands so I can get a better grip. So I got to ask you today, what in your life do you need to drop to get a better grip on the cross? Is it the crippling addiction that we've got hidden off in the corner? Or maybe for you, it's a little easier. Maybe it's just one less streaming subscription that you need to be attached to. For me, it was this chokehold that I wanted to put on comfort. See, comfort was what drove me, and I knew that there was safety in comfort, and I pursued it constantly. But I came to find out that there's no comfortable way to carry a cross. But it is a whole lot easier to carry a cross when you've dropped everything else and you have two hands firmly gripped. See, I had to drop this balancing act that I was putting on and pick it up. Christ here, he's distinguishing fans from followers. As Jesus continues, he begins to ask one more thing of the crowd. And he starts us off with a pair of parables, starting in verse 28. But don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might only complete the foundation before running out of money. Everyone would laugh at you. They would say, there's the person who started that build and couldn't afford to finish it. See, Jesus, he knows the crowd doesn't recognize how much it's truly going to cost to follow him. In the original language, this statement, it would have meant to count out the cost with individual pebbles. It wasn't just like a general estimation of how much it's going to cost. No, it was a meticulous calculation of how much following Jesus would change your life. And that would pick all over the insecurities of the crowd. For nothing would be worse than building a foundation for your beautiful new home and running out of money for your foundation. As one scholar puts it, that foundation then just becomes a monument to your stupidity. That's all you see is the foundation. And with nearly everything we buy in life, I think we count the cost. If we're looking for a house, if we're looking for a car or new clothes, if we're looking to change a job, or maybe if we're looking to add to our family, the cost is something we're going to be counting there. And one of my favorite developments with technology and shopping is all these filters that you can put on for what you're searching for. As an avid online shopper, this has changed the game for me entirely. It cuts out distractions and let me get straight to the chase. So let's say I'm looking for a 2016 Toyota Tacoma. Well, that's not going to do it for me, so I need the TRD package on there too, preferably. I need the good four-wheel drive. Got to be able to get on the beach and off and everywhere else I need to go. And if possible, I'm getting a little picky here, I'm going to ask that it has the cool sunroof. Not just the little one, but I want the moon roof, I think is what they call them. Let's upgrade this thing a little bit. So I'll add that into the search too. And then my favorite part, I don't want to see any of these trucks unless they're below $12,000. So now I know what I'm getting into and hopefully think I can afford it. You can do the same for a house. But the thing is, as soon as you press search, you start to see what comes up. And for that truck, I press search and the dream one pops up. It's that desert tan that looks really manly, so it's obviously the one that I want to go for. It's even got the cool sunroof. It's got the TRD Sport package. Not the best, but I'll take it, and that works for me. And I notice it, and I start scrolling through the pictures a little bit. Something looks off. It looks cool, but then I see the zoomed-out picture. It turns out the only thing in my price range was a Hot Wheel. What does that show me, though? It shows me that the truck I want, I cannot afford. I just don't have what it takes. And when you do that with a house, you can put in, I want 4 bedrooms, I want 2.5 bathrooms, and then search and see what the minimum price is. And you're knowing what it's going to cost you. You see, true disciples, too, they count the cost before they go to follow Jesus. Jesus, he continues on in verse 31. Or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the 20,000 soldiers marching against him? And if he can't, he will send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while the enemy is still far away. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. So Jesus, he's now thrown two stories at us. You got the one who was building, and then the one who was going to war. What do those two things nearly always have in common? They both are going to cost far more than you prepared for. And the point here Jesus is making, it's simple. You had better take everything into consideration before choosing to see if you have what it takes to follow Jesus. You heard how he ended that parable. We have to give up everything to follow him. You see, that same search that we do for a car or a house or anything, Jesus, he's doing that for us too. He's pulling up the search bar and he's typing in, I have to have something, have someone who can carry something heavy, so they can carry the very cross that killed me, however that looks for them. Or I need someone who can leave their family behind and hate everything else in comparison to me. Or they absolutely have to be ready to give up everything to follow me. That's what Jesus is typing in to his search bar as he's looking. The question is, if he searches that, will he find you? As Jesus gets ready to make his exit from this moment, he leaves the crowd with one final message. In verse 34. Salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses flavor, how do you make it salty again? Flavorless salt is good neither for the soil nor the manure pile. It's thrown away. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Okay, you know, as an American today, that salt is a very, very good thing. Like, we know that. And Jesus, he's making it clear that salt is still a positive. The issue, however, it comes up when it loses its flavor. Because, well, then it's worthless. Like, don't you just hate when that happens? Like, you're making this nice batch of mashed potatoes. You've stirred everything in. You take that first trial bite, and it's like, all right, this needs just a little something else, a little salt. So you go in your pantry, you grab your salt, you put a pinch in there, you stir it up, you try it again. It needs just a little more salt. So you throw another pinch in there, you stir it up, and you try it again. It still needs more salt? What's going on? So this time you're like, all right, well, maybe the issue is the salt. So you put a pinch in your hand and look around, make sure no one's watching, toss it in your mouth. It doesn't taste like anything. Don't you just hate when that happens? Like nothing has came out of the salt. It is done. Has that ever happened to anybody here? For the majority here, unless COVID has still got your taste buds, it has not happened for you. Because salt, in its natural form, it can't lose its flavor. Sodium chloride, or the chemical that makes salt, is one of the most stable chemicals on this planet. So why is one of the smartest men, or the smartest man who ever lived, talking about salt losing its flavor? Like, surely he knows better than that. That's not possible. Well, not for real salt. Here's the problem. Near the Dead Sea, where they would have been grabbing all of this salt and loading it up from the sea, they would go to the sea, go with a shovel, and pretty much just scoop it into a cart. And as this happens and the carts go off, well, there's a little bit of water in there still too. So as the water runs through the salt, it picks up some residue and it drips and drips and drips and drips all the way along the road. Nothing really happens after the first cart, but another cart goes by, another cart goes by. Before the end of the day, hundreds and hundreds of carts full of salt have gone by. And this residue starts to build up. So one day, these guys came around, and they're like, it looks kind of like salt. We'll load that up. So they scoop up the residue and throw it in their cart and take it off to market to sell. Well, here's the really crazy thing. The residue that they picked up, it looked like salt. It tasted like salt. I don't know about you, but I'm not looking for much more else out of my salt. If it does those two things, I'm going to believe it, that it's salt. The only difference is that this counterfeit salt, it loses its flavor in weeks. It's kind of the perfect scam because by the time you figure it out, they're long gone. So, to Jesus' point, once salt loses its flavor, it's done. There's no way you can bring back the salt's saltiness. There's nothing you can do. And it can't be used for anything. If you throw that residue on dirt, it's going to soak all the nutrients up out of the soil and ruin your dirt. If you throw that on manure, it's going to soak all the nutrients up and ruin it. It's so bad that it ruins poop. Can you get any worse than that? So the question is, what is flavorless salt? And why is Jesus, he's getting very aggressive about this and just coming at it. But I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think the better question to ask here is, who is flavorless salt? Because just as salt has to have all of its properties to be true salt, as a follower of Jesus, we have to have all of the traits that he calls a disciple to have. Because if I carry my cross and I give up everything except my family, I'm not a disciple. If I give up everything and I hate those I want to hug, but I refuse to carry my own cross, I'm not a disciple. And that's where the dilemma comes in. Jesus, he gave us 3 requirements. And there was no point in doing just one. And there's even less of a point of doing 2 when Jesus calls us to all 3. And Jesus, he's not one to hold back punches. So now the question of, what do I do, is on the table. So here's a challenge for everyone here today. Whether you've been a Christian for 30 years or you're going on 3 months strong, this is for you. Pause. Just for a moment and think about what the cost of following Jesus is for you. What does it look like to hate those you love in comparison to Jesus? What's going to be the biggest challenge for you to deny yourself and pick up your own cross and follow Christ? What's going to be the biggest obstacle for you giving up something to follow Jesus? Whatever stage of faith you're in right now, it's far better to press pause and count the cost than it's going to be to aimlessly move forward forever. So let's face this dilemma and become true disciples. That's the goal. But how do you know what a true disciple is? Well, a true disciple is true salt. For you, this might look like repenting of your sins and confessing to those close to you. And you might say, well, I don't have a spot for that. Well, we've got a spot for you. If you would look into life groups, we've got people that want to pour into you and people that you could pour into as well, and it is a great place to start for this. Or maybe this means committing or recommitting to life dedicated to Christ. That could look like a rededication, or that could look like you getting baptized, to be all in for Jesus. Or maybe this just means serving, whether here at the church in a few different roles or somewhere in your own community. But whatever you choose to do and whatever route you choose to go, my plea to you is not to be fake salt. Don't be an imposter. Our world today, we see plenty of imposters, and we don't need to add to that. Your community, our country, and our world, we deserve so much better than that. So let's be the type of disciples that attract other disciples to Jesus. Let's pray. Dear Father, I pray that we are ready to lay everything down for you, that we count the cost and that we see that you are worth it, you are everything. Prod our hearts that need it and give us grace where we need it even more. Push us to pursue you always, Father. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.